Well, I'd buy you a monkey. Haven't you always wanted a monkey? If I had $1,000,000, I'd buy you love. If I had $1,000,000, if I
Had $1,000,000.
if I had $1,000,000,
If I had $1,000,000.
if I had $1,000,000, I'd be rich.
Hey, whether or not you have $1,000,000, I am really glad that you decided to join us for the Media Education Lab webinar today. Welcome one and all. My name is Renee Hobbs. Today, we are very excited to have Joanna Burkhart from the University of Rhode Island. She's just written a really cool book called Media Smarts. And many of you know that the formula that we use for this webinar is a really cool one because we're doing it to promote community. We're an online community and we're coming here together for conversation. And so Joanna is planning to talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have a conversation that starts with these 3 questions that I'm putting into the chat. They are good ones. As you learn from Joanna today, you'll be able, when we move into our small group discussions, to explore questions like, are you already teaching language awareness in your classrooms? If so, how? What criteria do you consider and teach your students to consider in selecting reliable sources? And third question, people frequently blame the media for inaccurate reporting. People consider the media untrustworthy, but what is the media? What term could be coined to refer to organizations that report news based on standards and ethics? Okay, so Joanna, I have a feeling we're going to have a great conversation with you. Welcome and take it away.
Thank you. Just to give you a little background, I'm at URI and I have been there for more than 30 years now. And most of that time, I have been teaching students either in small groups or one-shots or classroom, online, credit, non-credit, lots of different teaching opportunities. When I went to college, there was no such thing as the internet. There was really no such thing as a personal computer, so that tells you how old I am. But in terms of doing research, it was probably easier then than it was now because scholarly materials were limited. You could look for scholarly books or you could look for scholarly journal articles, and that was about it. And those things came in paper. There were paper indexes. They had a controlled vocabulary. So you needed to use the right term in order to find the information that you were looking for. But the number of sources and the number of places that you could look for things was limited. So enter the internet age, and suddenly there are more sources than we know what to do with. It's an overwhelming amount of information. A Google search is probably the first thing that a student will do when they're looking for information on any topic. A Google search will result in millions of hits, but not all of those hits are going to be productive. Not all of them will answer the question or provide the information you're looking for. Will be reliable sources. It's just kind of a mix, and it's up to the computer user to figure out exactly what they need. Again, in the early days of Google, there used to be an advanced search where you could narrow your search by a number of different criteria. And over the years, it's become harder and harder to find that advanced search buttons. And instead, people use more and more natural language when they're using a search box. So students will inevitably type a question or a sentence in English about what they're looking for, thinking that the Google machine is going to be able to understand what they want. In reality, although AI and the algorithms have all gotten better, the machines are not really understanding the English sense of your sentence or your question. They're really just picking out keywords like we would have done in the past to bring back sources that may or may not answer the question. Okay, so the instant results that you get from something like a Google search are really gratifying, and they reinforce the feeling that faster is better. So students tend to look for a quick answer, and Google provides that. It's not necessarily a relevant answer, but that's not necessarily the first priority when students are searching. There are all types of sources mixed together, and there is a very mysterious and non-transparent algorithm that ranks those results from your search to show them to you in some sort of order. So if you have 1.5 million search, you have dozens and dozens and hundreds of pages of results to look through. And there isn't any really good way to tell why something is at the top of the list. Of course, the assumption is that the things at the top of the list are going to be the most relevant, but that is not the case. And you have to keep telling your students that that is not the case and that they need to be aware of that. It's also true that when people do search engine searches, that resources often come up behind a paywall. So if the resources are not available for free, students will often pass them by because they don't want to pay for information, or it requires an additional login or other steps in order to get to the information. And because students value the quick response, that's not a favorite way to get information because it requires extra time and extra steps. So overall, it makes finding good and reliable information difficult, not in terms of how quickly you can get a response, but in terms of how you can find the best information, the reliable information, the information that's going to help you solve your problem or answer your question. Okay, I'm going to start my PowerPoint, I hope. Okay, here we go. Sorry. All right, is that, can you see that?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay. A question I ask myself almost daily when I'm doing searches for information is who or what is the media? Because we get all this information from all different kinds of sources, it's hard to sort through them to find what you need. But in all of the criticisms of the media, there's very little time spent on defining what that means. What is the media? Well, of course, we are all part of the media. If we post something on Facebook or other social media, if we share something with somebody else, we are part of the media. Is that what they mean when they say the media is not to be trusted, or the media is doing or that or the other thing? Probably not, but if the general term is used, and it's almost meaningless because it applies to just about everybody. So a generalization like that is not very useful. So in order to understand what's being discussed, we need to narrow the frame, and every time somebody says something about the media, we need to respond with, what media are you talking about? So that we have some sense of where the complaint or the comment or the criticism lies. So for my own purposes, I don't think the media is a very meaningful term. The second question that comes up is that in all the stuff that we get via a computer search or in our social media feeds, what makes something a trusted source? We obviously all rely on a certain number of sources in order to get the information that we need. And trusted source is based on a lot of things that may be outside the person who wrote the story or the publisher who presents the story. There's lots of other things that control what becomes a trusted source. So in a recent study from Media Insight, they found that 9 out of 10 Americans aged 16 to 40, and that's a large group of people, say misinformation is a problem. So 90% of this age group of people think that misinformation is a problem. There's a new NewsGuard report out that adds to this. 20% of the videos automatically suggested on TikTok contain misinformation. So leads us to believe that there is a lot of misinformation out there that is being fed to us either accidentally or automatically as we're going through our day. The internet, as we all know, provides an overwhelming number of information sources. And individuals can access as many of them as they have time for, but they can never access all of them. So you have to make some choices along the way. The selection of media sources, it differs from person to person, and it's often based on beliefs that are far beyond the influence of us as educators. Culture, daily observation, personal experience, parental example are all ways that we select our, or impact the way we select our trusted sources. What we choose to believe from those trusted sources is based on prior beliefs about the particular topic. Belief often relies on the source of the information rather than the information itself. We're more likely to believe information that supports what we already believe, confirmation bias, and sources tend to be considered reliable if we believe what they're telling us. You get the picture here, it's very circular. And one thing feeds on the other. We tend to believe sources if we consider those sources to be reliable. But the reliable sources are reliable for unreliable reasons. So we get into these information bubbles where we are relying on sources because we feel those sources are reliable, because they enhance the information that we already believe, that they agree with our politics or our family upbringing or our religious background, whatever it happens to be. Those trusted sources supply information that we rely on. We select the trusted sources based on what we already believe. The circularity entraps us in these information bubbles, and it tends to extract or leave out any other approach to the particular problem. So we get farther and farther into a tunnel that doesn't allow us to see any other information. And competition among the media outlets causes most of those media outlets to use manipulative tactics so that they can keep our attention and not allow us to go explore in other areas. So how do these media sources become trusted sources? Almost all of them, including the broadcast media and the big media moguls, attract an audience with provocative headlines and pictures and captions. You go to the CNN page, to the NPR page, you go to the Vox page, you go to the Fox page, all of those things. The first thing you're going to see are headlines with pictures and captions. And sometimes those captions or the headlines are provocative in nature. The idea is to get you to click on the title so that you can get to the article itself. And frequently the article itself is not exactly where you thought the headline was going to take you. The media providers use audience beliefs to craft news stories. So if you're at a right-leaning political webpage, they're going to offer you stories that enhance or help you agree with what they're telling you. They create stories that emphasize what the audience already believes. They repeat to create a loyal following and to minimize the time spent at other sites. They use rhetoric to deepen divisions and exaggerate differences. And they pretty much assume that truth and accuracy are not as important as gaining audience share. The idea is to get your attention and keep your attention. And some news sites are nefarious about this, and other news sites are not so forthcoming as others, but they all do it to one extent or another. Propaganda is often used in news, especially news that is kind of outside the boundaries of our broadcast big station news. But propaganda is often included in all kinds of news reporting, and especially on news that's coming through our social media feed. So propaganda is created to respond to the needs and values of specific audiences. It simplifies ideas and information. And it attacks opponents of that information. Once a trusted source status is achieved, then there are a long list of propaganda techniques that can be used to steer audiences, to give them information that will agree with what they know and believe. There's dozens and dozens of techniques that are used in propaganda to get people to take a stand or believe something that may or may not be factual. So this is just a few on the list. Bandwagon is convincing people that because many others believe something, that they should believe it as well. The big lie is repeating a version of complex events over and over again. Black and white fallacy leads people to believe that there are only two sides to an issue, yes or no, black or white. Cherry picking is presenting only information that supports a premise and not looking at any of the arguments or the negative qualities of something. Euphemism is using synonyms to replace unpleasant words. Gaslighting is making people question what they know. quoting out of context is obviously taking a few words out of a bigger picture or paragraph or story. And straw man is creating a problem where none exists. So you can become the hero by solving the non-existent problem. All of these techniques and many others are used in order to get people to stay with a particular news source and to react to a particular news story. So today I wanted to focus on how words are used in media presentations of all kinds, and why those words matter, and how we should be addressing the use of words in our classrooms, in our reference interactions, in our one-shots, whatever it happens to be. It's important for people to not only understand that words matter, but they need to be thinking about words and how they're used and how that has an effect on how they respond. So often one word, a general word for a concept is sufficient. Most of us, when we hear the word snow, understand that it's white, cold stuff falling out of the sky, and we don't need to know too much more than that. But for some situations, that general concept is not really enough. For example, if you lived above the Arctic Circle and your safety depended on knowing what kind of snow was falling or was underfoot, you would need more than the word snow to convey that information. So in the far north, there were lots and lots of groups who had dozens of words for different kinds of snow. So for example, if you needed the kind of snow required to build an igloo, that had its own name. If you needed a word for the kind of snow that was wet and sloppy, that had its own word. So knowing the specific qualities of the issue at stake was important and can be important to everyone in a particular situation. So a specific word can convey a much more specific meaning than a general word. Word choice is often a means of conveying a particular slant or opinion. And if you whip out your thesaurus, you will find lots of words that have general associations, but they evoke different and kind of distant on the spectrum kinds of emotional responses. So for example, annoyed, irritated, angry, enraged, and apoplectic kind of give you the range of possibilities for a feeling of anger. For a feeling of location, you can say local, widespread, regional, global, hemispheric, and that also says something about what you want to convey. So words chosen to convey an emotion indicate to the reader or the listener how extreme that emotion is. And that evokes a similar emotion in the reader or listener. They know that the writer is angry about something or enraged about something or completely apoplectic about something. And the reader should wonder why that is. Spatial words are chosen so that we can have some idea or indication of how far the situation reaches. So if someone is apoplectic about a global issue, that tells you that it's not only very upsetting, but it is worldwide. Everybody should be upset about this. When we're looking at news sources, the headlines are frequently posed as questions. Even when the answer is obvious, and or when the content of the article can't really answer the question. You see these questions all over in the news, and it's not limited to questionable news sites. Everybody does it. Democrats lost ground with Latino voters in 2020. Will the midterms be worse? Well, okay. It's a question, but can we answer that question before the midterms? People can voice their opinion. They can probably find some statistics and some predictions, but they really can't answer that question. But if you're a Democrat or you're a Latino voter, or you want to know something about the 2020 election or how that might compare to future elections, you might click on this headline because you want to know the answer to the question. When you get to the article, you're not really going to get the answer to the question. You're going to get somebody's opinion about what could or might happen. Okay, in this second example, the headlines was posed as if the article attached had all the information that would ever be needed about the topic. So from CNN on September 22nd, today is the fall equinox. Here is everything you should know. Well, come on. You think a CNN article is going to take the time and the space and the resources to tell you every single thing you need to know about the fall equinox? Probably not. So again, this is somebody who is going to pick and choose things about the fall equinox, and it's really not a very controversial topic, but you can see how this can be translated to more important or life-threatening or politically difficult questions. And they'll tell you everything that they think you should need to know, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to tell you everything there is to know. What gets covered in news is also limited. You can't tell you everything that's going on everywhere. So editors pick and choose what topics they're going to cover and what news stories they're going to cover. So on September 14th, inflation was in the news. The news dropped that the US inflation had been less than people had hoped, or more than people had hoped, and lots of people reported on it. It caused a huge drop in the stock market. There were repercussions worldwide. So I went and looked at the headlines at CNN, Fox, NPR, BBC, Le Monde from France, and La Prensa in Argentina. They all covered stories on inflation for September 14th. And most of them covered the latest inflation numbers in the US. Why? Well, because what happens to the US economy has an effect on the economy worldwide. So there is interest in other countries and around the globe as to what the US economy is doing. Another story that I looked at was the potential US railroad strike, which didn't come about because the union and the owners settled. But again, I looked at the same list of news purveyors and found that CNN, Fox, and NPR covered the strike. The European and South American outlets did not, because the US railroad strike is apparently not going to affect the economies or the railroads in the European and South American areas. So it wasn't as big a story. It wasn't as relevant to the readers. So the tone of the stories that get covered is where I'm heading here. Headlines for stories on the US inflation kind of vary depending on the source. So CNN said another crucial inflation report shows wholesale price increases are easing. Fox, on the other hand, said wholesale inflation declines, but prices are still near a multi-decade high. So one is trying to say perhaps that things are looking better, while the other is trying to say that while things look better, prices are still really high. NPR chose to focus in on a specific part of the inflation problem, and they reported on electricity and the cost of electricity. BBC and Le Monde and La Prensa, they were less specific about what side they were taking. So BBC was talking about the Wall Street losses that were based on the high inflation rates. Le Monde was the only source that picked up that the inflation rate had actually declined for the second month, but it still remains high. And I translated this La Prensa headline myself, but in essence, it said that the bad inflation numbers were linked to the fall in the stock market. And that's what their story was going to be about. So the tone of the headlines is, it varies from source to source, and the audience that each of the sources is offered to. So angles and approaches, some of the reports on US inflation numbers were about inflation, some were about the stock market, and some were about a particular piece of the inflationary picture. Most of the sources reported that wholesale prices had declined. Le Monde, as I said, was the only one that reported that it was the second month in a row. And Fox was the only one that really had a but near multi-decade high prices still remain. And of the 6 sources I consulted, only the US sources reported on the potential railroad strike. So editors pick and choose what stories they're going to cover, how they're going to cover them, what the kernel, what the center of the story is going to focus on. News outlets use language that their readers and listeners can relate to, and the words are selected carefully. Choice of words often indicates to the readers and listeners what they should be feeling. So if it's a trusted source, they're telling you you should be mad about this, then if you're considering it a trusted source, then you will be mad about it. Emotion-laden words from a trusted source direct readers and listeners toward a specific feeling about the topic. And when the topic comes up again, the reader is more likely to feel that initial emotion again, even if they're looking at a different source of information at that point in time. Okay, so as an exercise, I thought we might look at words and how words can be inserted and deleted to change the emotional content of a particular thought or feeling. So for this exercise, this can be a good classroom exercise. It can be a good online exercise. It works well. Students can work in small groups or individually. The idea is to give students several headlines from several different kinds of news outlets. You want to have students describe any emotion they feel when reading the headlines. Have students identify emotion-evoking words in the headlines. Have students supply synonyms that change the emotional effect of the headline, including words that make the headline more emotional and words that make the headline less emotional. And then have students rewrite headlines so that they can create these emotions: humor, fear, anger, sadness, or joy. So take a headline identify the key words that evoke an emotion, find out what the emotion is that you have felt when you read it, and then rewrite the headlines so that it's clear that the word choice can make the headline more emotion-filled, less emotion-filled, more amusing, less amusing, whatever it happens to be. So, for example, using the NPR headline, a looming railroad strike could lead to empty shelves and stranded travelers. You want to know what emotion does this headline evoke? Does it make you afraid or dread? Do you feel dread or anxiety? What words create that emotion? Pick out the key words that might be causing emotional responses. Identify synonyms for those emotion-laden words, and then rewrite the headlines with other words to create different feelings. So you want to reconvene the large group, of course, so you can talk about how successful or unsuccessful the word choices are. And you want to discuss how awareness of the effects of word choice can derail attempts to sway the audience emotion. So if people know that a media report is trying to sway their emotions, that can temper the response to those words. Okay, so I have some possible headlines that could be used in this assignment to get started, but you may have others of your own that you think would be useful. So I would suggest that, I don't know if you have groups already set up or you want to set up groups or have people work independently, but however you want to do this, use one or two of these headlines and create a different headline with different words that create different emotions.
Okay, so what a great idea. And I really like the idea that we maybe combine this activity with the questions we have at the conclusion too, Joanna. We could do that, right?
Sure.
Can you put these headlines into the chat?
Sure.
So that people can, as they go into their small group rooms, have access to those. I think that could be a very, very fun activity. So I'm going to see if I can summarize what you've just asked us to do. When we move into our small groups, we're going to introduce ourselves to each other because this is a great networking opportunity, right? And then we're going to play with rewriting the headlines, right? Then we might explore one or more of the three questions that you have posed to us. Those questions are at the conclusion of your talk, but I'm just putting them in the chat now. Are you already teaching language awareness? What criteria do you use in talking about reliable sources? And what about the media? Is there another term? So we'll do both activities, the rewriting of the headlines and the discussion, and then we'll come back with about 8 or 10 minutes for us to reconvene as you suggest. Does that sound okay with you, Joanna?
Sounds great.
Great. Everybody clear on the activity? It should be a lot of fun. You're going to get an invitation now to join a breakout room. So have fun with it, right? Hold on just a second. I'm going to get these rooms set up and I'm going to get those rooms set up. You're going to meet some cool people, have a great conversation. We'll see you back here in about 10 minutes or so. So you should be getting an invitation now to join a room. Okay, so I see Karen, Lori, Randall is in a room. Joanna, you've got an invitation to move to a room 2. Room 2 is open to you. And Okay, I'm going to invite you, if you're in this conversation right now, move yourself to the breakout room, and we'll come back here in about 10 minutes.
You are muted. You're muted.
Okay, I'm just, we're waiting for the other group is in lively conversation. I can see that right now. Karen, Laurie, Stephen, and Randall, but they'll be coming back in about 36 or 37 seconds. There they are. Hey, you're back. Now we only have a few minutes to do some reflection, but I'd love to hear from from representatives in each group about what insights emerged from your discussion that were noteworthy to you. Stephen, can we start with you, my friend?
Oh, no. Well, we actually spent some time talking about, creating an environment where students can kind of participate in generating media themselves, because we feel like, as you say, the way by which they learn about things is by creating those things themselves. So it kind of can be a mechanism for them to create a defense for themselves, or to create greater depth of understanding for themselves. We talked mostly in terms of the headlines about the Slovenian PM and the outrageous interference. And we thought it was funny because outrageous is an emotional word anyway, but then they put quotes around it. And so it's like, is it emotional or is it not emotional? I think that about what we covered.
I think about the humorous sites that abound, satire and that sort of thing, where you could take that kind of a headline and just make it so absurd that it's funny. And I think there are groups that do that, and then other people see that stuff and they don't understand that it's meant to be funny.
Yeah.
So that also drives divisions and problems in understanding what's actually happening.
Yeah, well, this is a key component of the theoretical frame called postmodernism, that really there's no distinction between information, entertainment, and persuasion, that the boundaries have become so blurry that it almost doesn't matter anymore, say postmodern theorists. So, and the question is, what are the social consequences of a reality where we don't make distinctions between entertainment, information, and persuasion? And you know what? One of the persons I rely on for as a thought leader in my world is John Oliver. And John Oliver is a comedian.
Yeah.
But his insights on news and current events are meaningful to me. So I think it is interesting, Joanna, about how humor plays a complicated role in our society today when it comes to news and information and being well informed.
Very much so.
I think there's a real trend in the traditional news media towards a more informality. Like I listen to NPR like in the morning, and it used to be kind of a formal station, and now they've got, at least on GBH, the morning pair, they're like, trying to be friendly and make little jokes. And I mean, it's sometimes it frankly, it irritates me. I say, just tell me what's going on. I don't want to hear, how your drive-in was, and So,
well, I think that's all part of creating the draw for their audience.
yeah.
You have to appear to be human beings rather than just reporting the news, as was the case when I was young and dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Yes.
So was anybody able to create a headline that was joyful? No.
We went for fear.
Yeah. Fear, I think, is easier.
Fear is easier. And that's a big insight that comes from a result of this activity, right? So I think that's
Yes.
kind of an interesting way in which a very playful activity could lead you to leave the room with some, worrisome, profound, and at least reflective stances. It was very easy for us to change the words of these headlines and make them more fear-inducing.
Well, and again, the awareness that that's what's happening can be very useful in stopping it from happening or stopping it from having the effect that it was meant to have. So that needs to be reiterated.
Other insights that emerged from your small group conversation that you'd like to share?
We learned about the bad news game, which was we were all found fascinating.
Yeah. That's a very cool little media literacy game that you pretend to be a disinformation specialist. And of course, students sometimes don't like standing in that position, right? Where they have to be the bad guy. But then they learn to recognize some of the techniques that disinformation specialists use. So yeah, it's similar to the game we played because you are becoming more aware of manipulation, right? So I think that's a really interesting insight. You know, Joanna, my friend Neil Postman used to say, all language is fundamentally persuasive.
Sure.
And what he meant by that was that every choice of word you use is linked to some intentionality on your part, right? Of wanting other people to think and feel a certain way. And
Right.
I actually really, the George Orwell introduced that idea, Neil Postman picked it up, and we continue to rediscover it, right? Every generation. And now in our headline culture, I think activities that invite us to think about language are, just as vital and important as they ever were. And knowing more about how and where those activities can be encountered in the higher ed space seems kind of important because it seems like it might be relevant to every field and discipline. It might transcend disciplines to focus on language's fundamentally persuasive nature and the decisions we make about sources to trust. So let's give Joanna a big round of applause. Oh, no, wait, Joanna, I want you to have the last word before we give you applause because we convened and reflected on your ideas today. Do you have any parting words for us?
Well, just that I think we all have a lot of job security because this is an ongoing problem and it seems like it's a never-ending problem. Every time there's something that comes along, there's somehow that we have to help people understand what's happening and try and mitigate the results. So kudos to all of you who are teaching the teachers or teaching the students, and keep up the good work because they need to know what's happening in order to understand how to use information safely and appropriately.
So wise, so wise. Thank you so much for participating and giving us the insights that you have. I did want to just make a little announcement about our next week's program. Next week, we're featuring Brett Pierce. He's the author of a new book called Expanding Literacy, Bringing Digital Storytelling into Your Curriculum. That's a Heinemann publication. He's been working for years to support teachers who are using media production activities, digital storytelling activities in the classroom. And his company, Meridian Stories, has made it easy for teachers who might not be so familiar with how to use digital storytelling. He sort of supports teachers in that work. So that event is next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Tell your friends, come and join us again. Thanks for being part of this today. I'm Renee Hobbs, Media Education Lab. I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.